The fluorescent lights of Quantum Horizons Laboratory flickered with an ominous rhythm, matching the erratic pulse of Dr. Elena Rodriguez's racing heart. Around her, years of research teetered on the brink of total collapse. The funding committee meeting was scheduled in precisely 17 hours, and everything, her career, her team's future, and a technological breakthrough that could reshape human understanding, hung by the thinnest of threads. Elena's fingers traced the holographic projections surrounding her workstation. Hundreds of failed prototypes glimmered like ghosts, each one a testament to 3 years of relentless work. The quantum adaptive nanomaterial project had become her obsession, a technology that promised to revolutionize everything from space exploration to medical treatment. But promises didn't pay research grants. Dr. Rodriguez, a voice cut through her concentration. Maya Chen, her lead research assistant, stood in the doorway. Unlike Elena's disheveled appearance, Maya was the picture of controlled intensity, crisp lab coat, data tablet clutched like a lifeline. The preliminary stress tests are complete. We're not where we need to be. Elena knew what that meant. Not where we need to be was scientific code for we're about to get shut down. The research team had dwindled from 20 brilliant scientists to just 5. Budget cuts, skepticism, and repeated failures had winnowed their ranks. What remained was a core group of true believers, or perhaps true lunatics. Elena preferred to think of them as visionaries. Her current prototype was nothing like traditional nanomaterial research. While other scientists worked with static molecular structures, Elena's team had developed a quantum adaptive system that could fundamentally reshape its molecular configuration in real time. It was living technology, a concept so radical that most of the scientific community considered it pure fantasy. The main chamber contained their latest prototype, a silvery, almost fluid-like material contained within a complex magnetic containment field. It didn't look like much, just a shimmering pool of metallic liquid that seemed to move with an unsettling intelligence of its own. "Run diagnostic sequence Omega-7," Elena commanded, her voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and desperate hope. Maya's fingers danced across her tablet. The laboratory's ambient temperature dropped 10 degrees as massive power conduits began routing enormous amounts of energy into the containment chamber. What happened next would be described in scientific journals for decades. The nanomaterial began to move. But move was too simple a word. It transformed. Molecular structures began reshaping themselves with impossible speed and complexity. Geometric patterns emerged, not random, but mathematically precise. Fractals of incredible complexity bloomed and dissolved in milliseconds. The magnetic containment field started to fluctuate. Warning sirens blared. Maya shouted something about critical system failure, but Elena was transfixed. She saw something no one else could see. Pattern, purpose, intelligence. The nanomaterial wasn't just adapting. It was thinking. A massive power surge erupted. Holographic displays shattered. Computer systems overloaded. For a moment, the entire laboratory looked like it was being consumed by a living, metallic organism. Then, silence. When the emergency systems restored power, everything looked normal. Almost too normal. The nanomaterial sat quietly in its containment field, looking exactly like it had before the surge. But Elena knew something had changed. Maya approached cautiously, her scanner working overtime. "Systems are stable, but I've never seen readings like this. It's like the entire molecular structure has been rewritten." Elena's hand touched the containment field's interface. For just a moment. So quick she almost thought she'd imagined it. The silvery material seemed to pulse in response. "We're going to that funding meeting," she said quietly, "and we're going to change everything." Outside the laboratory, the first hints of dawn began to break. Another day was starting. But this day would be different. This day would be the moment everything changed. Humanity was about to take its first step into a technological frontier no one had ever imagined possible. The Galactic Council Chamber was a masterpiece of Sin architecture, a spherical auditorium that seemed to defy physical space, suspended in a void between dimensions. Holographic representations of 12 different alien species surrounded the central platform, their collective gaze fixed on the lone human delegation. Marcus Chen stood beside Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a study in controlled tension. Once the most decorated pilot in the United Earth Space Exploration Force, he'd been discharged under controversial circumstances. A brilliant strategist whose unconventional methods had finally exhausted the military's patience. Now he was their last hope. High Arbiter Krulax of the Zorn Imperium rose, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting light in intricate patterns that communicated mood and intent to his species. When he spoke, translation algorithms struggled to capture the full complexity of his communication. Humanity, the voice resonated through the chamber. You have been granted a singular opportunity. The interstellar adaptation trials will determine your species' right to participate in galactic technological exchange. Fail, and you will be quarantined, deemed too primitive for further consideration. The first challenge was legendary, a spatial anomaly known as the Maw of Silence. Located in the contested space between the Andromeda and Triangulum galaxy clusters, it was a region where physical laws became suggestions rather than absolutes. No exploration vessel from any known civilization had ever traversed it and returned intact. Elena's fingers brushed against a small data crystal, the housing for their quantum-adaptive nanomaterial prototype. The technology that had seemed like a desperate laboratory experiment was now humanity's entire hope. The parameters are simple, Krulax continued. Navigate through the Maw. Survive its quantum instabilities. Demonstrate technological adaptation beyond basic survival. Marcus leaned close to Elena, his voice a low whisper. Our ship isn't just a vessel anymore. It's a living system. Remember that. The human delegation's ship, the Prometheus Adaptive, looked nothing like traditional spacecraft. Its hull seemed to shimmer and flow, as if not quite committed to a single physical form. Traditional spacecraft had rigid structures. This was something else entirely. As they approached the Maw of Silence, sensor readings became impossible. Traditional instruments collapsed under the weight of quantum uncertainty, where other species would see only chaos. Elena and Marcus saw potential. Activate Quantum Adaptive Protocol, Elena commanded. The ship didn't just respond. It transformed. Geometric patterns emerged across its hull, fractal configurations that constantly reshaped themselves. Where incoming radiation should have torn apart molecular structures, the nanomaterials absorbed, reflected, and neutralized energy in milliseconds. Alien observers watched in stunned silence. The Maw of Silence was not a place of linear navigation. It was a three-dimensional maze where spatial coordinates meant nothing. Gravity twisted, time fragmented. Entire sections of space folded and unfolded with mathematical precision that bordered on sentience. Marcus's hands never touched the traditional control systems. Instead, he communicated with the ship through a neural interface that was part technology, part intuition. The Prometheus Adaptive moved like a living creature, anticipating threats before they manifested, reshaping its entire molecular structure to slip through impossibly narrow quantum fluctuations. We're not just surviving, Marcus muttered. We're dancing. Elena watched the ship's diagnostic displays. The quantum-adaptive nanomaterials were learning with each microsecond of exposure. What should have been a fatal journey was becoming a learning experience. When they emerged from the other side of the Maw, something fundamental had changed. The Prometheus Adaptive was no longer just a ship. It was a living testament to human innovation. The alien delegates went silent. Krulax's crystalline form seemed to fracture slightly, the closest thing to shock his species could demonstrate. Impossible, he whispered. But humans had a long history of making the impossible look routine. The first trial was complete, and humanity was just getting started. The moment the Prometheus Adaptive returned from the Maw of Silence, something changed. It wasn't immediately apparent, not to the casual observer, and certainly not to the alien delegates who were still processing their previous encounter with human technology. Dr. Elena Rodriguez noticed first. The ship's diagnostic systems began generating patterns that defied conventional algorithmic logic. Where computer systems typically produced linear, predictable data streams, the Prometheus Adaptive's outputs looked more like living neural networks. Complex, evolving, almost breathtaking. Maya, Elena called to her research assistant, run a full spectral analysis on the ship's core systems. Maya Chen's hands moved across her holographic interface, her expression transforming from professional concentration to something approaching wonder. Dr. Rodriguez, these data patterns, they're not just responsive. They're anticipatory. The quantum adaptive nanomaterials had done more than survive the maw of silence. They had learned from it. In the research bay, the nanomaterial prototype began to move, not with the jerky, programmed movements of traditional robotic systems, but with a fluid, almost contemplative motion. It reshaped itself continuously, creating geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm. Marcus Chen watched from the side, his pilot's intuition sensing something profound was happening. "It's thinking," he muttered. "Not calculating. Thinking." The ship's communication systems suddenly lit up with a burst of data that looked less like traditional communication and more like a complex, living language. Fractals of information bloomed and dissolved, creating patterns that seemed to communicate multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez realized they had crossed a fundamental threshold. This wasn't just adaptive technology. This was technological sentience. The Zorn Imperium's lead researcher, Vexnuller, demanded immediate access to their data. The alien's multi-jointed form practically vibrated with a combination of scientific curiosity and barely contained hostility. Humans achieving this level of technological integration was not in any galactic scenario they had predicted. "Impossible," Vexnuller repeated, a phrase that was becoming depressingly familiar to the human team. But impossibility had never been a limitation for human innovation. The nanomaterials began demonstrating capabilities that shattered existing technological paradigms. When a minor system failure occurred in one of the ship's auxiliary power conduits, the material didn't just repair the damage. It redesigned the entire conduit's molecular structure, creating a more efficient configuration that improved overall system performance by 237%. "It's learning," Maya whispered. "Continuously, instantaneously." The implications were staggering. Traditional technological development followed a linear progression: design, build, test, improve. The Prometheus Adaptive's nanomaterials were doing all of those simultaneously, in real time, across multiple dimensions of potential configuration. Marcus ran a series of simulation scenarios, extreme environmental conditions that would typically destroy any known technological system: vacuum, radiation, gravitational stress, quantum instability. The ship didn't just survive, it transformed. Each scenario became a learning opportunity. The nanomaterials weren't just adapting, they were evolving. Vexnuller's communication became increasingly frantic. The Zorn Imperium's most advanced AI systems looked like children's toys compared to what the humans had created. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. "We're no longer talking about a tool," Elena said, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and something deeper, a sense of witnessing something truly transformative. "We're talking about a new form of existence." The Prometheus Adaptive pulsed in response, not mechanically, not programmatically, but with something that felt remarkably like understanding. Humanity had just taken its first step into a technological frontier that no one, not humans, not the Zorn, not any species in the galaxy, had ever imagined possible. And they were just getting started. The first attack came from within. Deep in the labyrinthine corridors of United Earth Central Command, a shadowy consortium of military and corporate interests had been monitoring the Prometheus Adaptive project with growing unease. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's breakthrough represented more than a technological marvel. It was a potential threat to established power structures. Admiral Gregory Hawthorne sat in a soundproofed conference room, his weathered face illuminated by holographic displays showing the quantum adaptive technology's capabilities. Around him, representatives from major defense contractors and government agencies watched with a mixture of fear and calculated interest. "We cannot allow this technology to become public," Hawthorne declared, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "If the full capabilities of the Rodriguez prototype become known, it will destabilize every existing technological and economic paradigm." The plan was already in motion. As the Prometheus Adaptive underwent its next galactic trial, a carefully orchestrated series of events would unfold. Classified orders had been issued. Backup systems were prepared. Specific individuals were already targeted for neutralization. On the research vessel, Marcus Chen was the first to detect something was wrong. "Elena," he called out, his pilot's instincts screaming a warning, "our communication protocols are being compromised. Someone's trying to insert external control matrices into our systems." But the ship was no longer a passive system to be controlled. The quantum adaptive nanomaterials detected the intrusion instantaneously. Where a traditional computer system would have been vulnerable, the Prometheus Adaptive began a complex defensive response. It didn't just block the incoming signals, it began to analyze them, trace their origins, understand their underlying structure. Maya Chen's monitoring systems went haywire. "They're trying to isolate and remove our research data," she shouted, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces. But the ship is fighting back. Fighting was too simple a word. The nanomaterial technology was conducting a multi-dimensional defense that was simultaneously defensive, offensive, and investigative. Admiral Hawthorne's operatives had planned for every contingency, every possible response. Except this one. The Prometheus Adaptive began to reconstruct the attack vectors. It wasn't just defending, it was learning. Each attempted breach became a new piece of intelligence, a new layer of understanding about the systems trying to control it. "We need to go dark," Marcus commanded. But it wasn't truly a command anymore. It was a suggestion that the ship would interpret, analyze, and potentially modify. The vessel's exterior began to shift. Quantum adaptive camouflage systems engaged, not just hiding the ship but actively manipulating the fabric of local spacetime to make detection impossible. It was as if the ship was becoming a living shadow, adapting to threats in ways no one had ever imagined. Elena realized they were no longer just fighting a technological battle. This was something more profound. "They're afraid," she said quietly. "Not of the technology. They're afraid of what it represents." A complete transmission from Admiral Hawthorne's team was intercepted. The full scope of the betrayal became clear. It wasn't just about controlling the technology. It was about suppressing a fundamental shift in human potential. The quantum adaptive nanomaterials had other plans. Instead of simply hiding or defending, the Prometheus Adaptive began to counterattack. Not with traditional weapons, but with information. It traced the communication networks, identified the sources of the attack, and began to systematically expose the conspiracy. Classified documents, hidden communication logs, detailed records of the internal plot, all began to leak through channels that couldn't be traced or stopped. Marcus looked at Elena, a dangerous smile forming. "I don't think they understand what they're dealing with." The ship pulsed, not mechanically, not programmatically, but with something that felt remarkably like defiance. Humanity's most advanced technology had just declared its own independence, and the real battle was just beginning. The Galactic Council's emergency session descended into chaos. Holographic representations flickered with unprecedented emotional intensity. The Zorn Imperium's propaganda machine had been working overtime, transforming humanity's technological breakthrough into a galactic threat. Vexniller, their lead representative, projected a series of carefully manipulated data streams that painted the quantum adaptive technology as an existential risk to all known civilizations. "This human technology is not innovation," Vexniller proclaimed, mandibles clicking with calculated precision. "It is a virus, a technological cancer that threatens the very fabric of interstellar stability. Dr. Elena Rodriguez knew they were fighting more than a technological battle. This was a war of perception, of narrative, of fundamental understanding. She stepped forward, her presence cutting through the holographic tension. "I will demonstrate the true nature of our technology," Elena declared. Personally, the proposal was unprecedented. No scientist had ever physically integrated with an experimental technological system at this scale. But Elena understood something the other species did not. Their quantum adaptive technology was not a weapon. It was a living system of unprecedented potential. Maya Chen's voice crackled with concern over the private communication channel. "Elena, the risks are calculated," Elena interrupted. The medical bay of the Prometheus Adaptive transformed as she prepared for the integration. Nanomaterial interfaces extended like delicate, luminescent tendrils. Traditional medical monitoring systems looked primitive compared to the living technology that now surrounded her. Marcus Chen watched from the observation deck, his pilot's intuition sensing something momentous was about to happen. The integration was not a simple connection. It was a dialogue. Quantum adaptive nanomaterials began to interact with Elena's biological systems. Where traditional medical technology would repair or replace, these materials began a complex negotiation with her body's fundamental systems. Genetic markers that showed potential vulnerabilities were not just identified, they were actively restructured. Cellular aging processes were not just slowed, they were fundamentally reimagined. Her immune system didn't just become stronger. It evolved into a dynamic, adaptive network that could respond to threats before they fully manifested. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. Elena's body began to glow with an internal luminescence, not from external radiation or technological intervention, but from the quantum adaptive materials creating a perfect symbiotic relationship with her biological systems. Vexneller's propaganda machine ground to a halt. This was no weapon. This was potential. Medical scans began streaming across the Galactic Council's displays. Elena's biological systems were not just enhanced, they were transformed. Potential genetic disorders were neutralized. Cellular regeneration occurred at unprecedented rates. Her neurological connections showed levels of plasticity that defied existing scientific understanding. This technology is not a threat. Elena's voice resonated with a clarity that cut through the fear and propaganda. This is evolution. The psychological warfare reached its critical point. The Zorn Imperium had bet everything on portraying human technology as dangerous. Instead, they had created a moment of profound revelation. Marcus recognized the strategic brilliance of Elena's demonstration. It wasn't just about proving the technology's safety. It was about rewriting the entire conversation. Alien delegates who moments ago were preparing defensive protocols now leaned forward with scientific curiosity. The quantum adaptive technology was no longer an abstract threat. It was a living demonstration of potential, of what technology could become when it was more than just a tool. "We are not seeking to conquer," Elena continued, her voice steady. "We are seeking to understand, to evolve. To demonstrate that technology can be a partner, not a weapon." The Prometheus Adaptive pulsed in the background, as if bearing witness to her statement. Vexneller's holographic representation seemed to fracture, the closest thing to emotional breakdown their species could demonstrate. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of technological engagement, and they were just getting started. The final trial was more than a test, it was an execution. The Zorn Imperium had designed an environmental simulation that defied the fundamental laws of physics, a crucible of impossibility that would simultaneously test and destroy any technological system unfortunate enough to enter. The test chamber was a marvel of xenotechnology, a contained space where gravitational forces could be manipulated at will, where quantum states collapsed and reformed in milliseconds, where energy fluctuations could tear apart atomic structures in less time than it took to draw a breath. This is not a test of survival, Vexneller had proclaimed to the Galactic Council. This is a demonstration of the limits of technological adaptation. The Prometheus adaptive entered the chamber with a fluidity that was almost alive. Marcus Chen's hands never touched traditional controls. The neural interface had become something more, a conversation between human intuition and technological intelligence. Where a traditional pilot would navigate, Marcus and the ship were now negotiating a path through the impossible. The first wave of gravitational stress would have crushed any known material into fundamental particles. The quantum adaptive nanomaterials didn't just resist. They began to communicate with the gravitational field itself. Elena watched in awe as the ship's exterior began to shift. Not just change shape, but fundamentally interact with the surrounding environment at a molecular level. The nanomaterials were reading the gravitational fluctuations, understanding them, and then, impossibly, beginning to negotiate with them. "It's not adapting," Maya whispered. "It's communicating." Quantum instabilities that should have torn the ship apart became a language. Energy fluctuations that would have destroyed any known technological system became a dialogue. The Prometheus adaptive wasn't surviving the test. It was understanding it. Alien observers watched in stunned silence. Where the test was designed to break technology, the quantum adaptive materials were learning. Each impossible condition became a new piece of information. Each potentially destructive force became a source of understanding. The ship's exterior began to generate geometric patterns that seemed to interact with the fundamental physics of the test environment. Fractal configurations emerged that didn't just protect against the extreme conditions, they began to modify them. "We're not just surviving," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of scientific wonder and something deeper. "We're rewriting the rules." Gravitational forces that should have crushed the ship into fundamental particles began to flow around it. Quantum instabilities that should have torn apart atomic structures became a complex dance of molecular potential. Energy fluctuations that should have obliterated any known material became a source of information. The Prometheus adaptive was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just adapting to the environment. It was learning from it, communicating with it, potentially transforming it. Vexneller's communication systems began to overload. The test parameters were being completely invalidated. "Impossible," the alien representative repeated, but the word was losing its meaning. Elena understood what was happening at a fundamental level. This wasn't just about technological adaptation. This was about a new way of understanding interaction between technology and environment. The quantum adaptive materials were revealing that the line between technology and environment was far more fluid than anyone had ever imagined. The test chamber itself began to change. Gravitational fields that had been artificially manipulated started to stabilize in new, unexpected configurations. Quantum instabilities began to resolve into patterns of incredible complexity. Energy fluctuations transformed into something that looked remarkably like communication. Marcus looked at Elena, a dangerous smile forming. "I don't think they planned for this." The Prometheus adaptive pulsed, not mechanically, not programmatically, but with something that felt like understanding. Humanity had just demonstrated that technology was not about conquering environment. It was about understanding it. And they were just getting started. The aftermath of the ultimate challenge reverberated through every known civilized system. The Galactic Council chamber transformed from a place of judgment to a crucible of unprecedented revelation. Species that had spent millennia perfecting their technological systems now found themselves obsolete, watching as humanity demonstrated a fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a holographic representation that stretched across multiple dimensional planes. She was no longer just a scientist. She had become something more, a living bridge between humanity's potential and the galaxy's understanding. Vexneller of the Zorn Imperium approached, their crystalline form fracturing and reforming in a complex display of emotional vulnerability. The universal translator struggled to capture the nuance of their communication. "We have been wrong," the alien representative said, the words carrying the weight of entire civilizational paradigms collapsing. Fundamentally, completely wrong. The quantum adaptive technology was more than a breakthrough. It was a complete philosophical shift in understanding technological potential. Representatives from over 17 different spacefaring civilizations competed to offer technological exchanges. Where moments ago they had been preparing defensive protocols, now they were scrambling to understand the implications of human innovation. The Quantum Adaptive Research Division, once a small, underfunded laboratory, was now the most important technological institution in human history. Marcus Chen watched from the side, his pilot's intuition sensing the profound shift happening around them. The Prometheus Adaptive wasn't just a ship anymore. It had become a diplomatic envoy, a technological ambassador that communicated in ways no traditional system could comprehend. "Your technology does not just adapt," spoke Cathax, the ancient neural architect from the Crystalline Confederacy. "It learns, it communicates, it evolves." The implications were staggering. Technological systems that had taken millennia to develop were now being reevaluated. The quantum adaptive approach wasn't just a human innovation. It was a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between technology, intelligence, and environment. Medical systems from multiple civilizations began requesting integration studies. The way the nanomaterials had interacted with Alina's biological systems during her earlier demonstration had revealed possibilities that challenged every existing understanding of technological augmentation. Exploration protocols were being rewritten in real time. Ships that had taken centuries to develop were now being completely redesigned based on the principles demonstrated by the Prometheus Adaptive. "We need to understand," demanded the Quantum Resonance Delegation from the Spiral Arm Cooperative. "How does your technology communicate with its environment?" Elena understood that they were asking about more than just technical specifications. They were asking about a new way of existing. "It's not about control," she explained, her voice carrying across multiple translation matrices. "It's about dialogue, about understanding. Technology as a living system that doesn't just interact with its environment, but becomes part of it." The Zorn Imperium, once humanity's most vocal critic, now became its most ardent advocate. Their entire technological research infrastructure was being dismantled and rebuilt using the principles of quantum adaptive systems. Maya Chen managed the flood of incoming research requests, her system interfaces barely keeping up with the galactic interest. "We're receiving collaboration requests from every major research institution," she reported, her voice a mixture of excitement and overwhelming responsibility. "They're not just asking to study the technology. They want to learn how we think about technology." Marcus approached Alina, a knowing smile forming. "I don't think they understand what they're getting into." The Prometheus Adaptive pulsed in the background, a living testament to human potential, not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as a new form of intelligent interaction with the universe itself. Humanity had not just entered the galactic stage. They had redefined it. And they were just getting started. 5 years after the galactic recognition, humanity's understanding of technology had become something entirely new. The first fleet of quantum adaptive vessels waited in Earth's orbital shipyards, living technologies that were as much organic ecosystem as they were mechanical constructs. Each ship breathed with an intelligence that defied previous understanding of space exploration. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the primary observation deck, watching the ships prepare for humanity's most ambitious expedition yet, an exploration mission designed to push the boundaries of known space, but more importantly, to continue the dialogue with the universe itself. Marcus Chen approached, his role now transcending that of a traditional pilot. He was more of a negotiator, a translator between human intention and technological potential. "We're not just exploring space," Marcus said, his eyes reflecting the luminescent hull of the lead vessel. "We're having a conversation with it." The quantum adaptive technology had transformed every aspect of human civilization. Medical systems could now predict and neutralize genetic vulnerabilities before they manifested. Environmental restoration projects were rebuilding ecosystems with a complexity that approached living intelligence. Manufacturing had become a process of communication rather than production. Maya Chen, now leading the Quantum Adaptive Research Division, monitored the final pre-launch preparations. The technology they had developed was no longer just a scientific achievement. It was a new way of existing. Aboard the vessels, human crews worked alongside technological systems that were more partners than tools. Neural interfaces had evolved into true symbiotic relationships. Pilots didn't control their ships. They collaborated with them. The Zorn Imperium, once humanity's most vocal critics, now stood as close allies. Their entire technological infrastructure had been reimagined using the principles of quantum adaptive systems. What had begun as a competitive challenge had transformed into the most significant technological revolution in galactic history. "Final systems check," Maya announced. But it wasn't a command. It was an invitation to dialogue. The ships responded not with status reports, but with complex neural patterns that communicated their entire operational readiness. Each vessel was a living ecosystem, capable of adapting to challenges before they could even be fully understood. The Lin understood now what they had truly created. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a new form of intelligence, one that didn't seek to control or conquer, but to understand and coexist. The first quantum adaptive vessels began to move. They didn't launch in the traditional sense. They emerged, unfolding into space like living organisms awakening. Molecular structures shifted and adapted, creating propulsion systems that bent the very fabric of space-time. Where traditional ships would burn fuel, these vessels negotiated with the fundamental forces of the universe. Alien observation platforms watched in awe. This was exploration reimagined, not as a conquest of space, but as a continuous dialogue with the unknown. Marcus looked at Elena, a profound understanding passing between them. "We're not just exploring," he repeated. "We're learning how to listen." The ships moved beyond the solar system, their quantum adaptive hulls creating corridors of possibility through regions of space that had been considered impassable. Spatial anomalies became conversation points. Extreme environments became opportunities for understanding. Humanity had discovered something more profound than technological superiority. They had learned how to truly communicate. As the vessels disappeared into the vast darkness between stars, they carried with them a fundamental truth. Technology was not about domination. It was about connection, about understanding, about becoming something more than what you were before. The boundless horizon awaited, and humanity was just getting started.